Have you ever completely believed a story only to be caught off guard a few days later when you heard the truth from someone else? In that moment, you might find yourself wondering, why did I not realize it right when I was standing in front of them? Because throughout that entire conversation, everything sounded perfectly normal. There was nothing that made you suspicious. And yet, later on, you discovered that the whole story was completely false. So where does the problem actually come from? Is it because they are just that good at acting? Or is it because we overlook the tiny signals their body unintentionally revealed? In reality, when someone lies, they often give off many small signs through their behavior and the way they speak. If you pay just a little attention, you can absolutely notice it. So what are those signs? Well, in today's video, I am going to share with you the signs that help you recognize when someone is lying, so you can spot the lie right in the middle of the conversation, instead of having to wait until someone else tells you the truth afterward. All right, now let's get started. Why we struggle to recognize lies. Before we dive into the signs, let's take a step back and look at a bigger question. Why is it so hard for us to notice when someone is lying? The truth is, the human brain has a mechanism called the truth bias. To conserve energy, your brain naturally assumes that the person in front of you is telling the truth, because that helps maintain smooth and harmonious relationships. For example, imagine a close friend borrows money from you and promises to pay you back next week. Even if you feel a little uneasy inside, your brain will still try to come up with reasons to believe them. You might think they're just going through a tough time, or tell yourself that since they are a close friend, they will probably keep their word. In other words, trusting someone is often the path that requires the least effort for your brain. On top of that, lying actually takes a lot of mental effort. When you tell the truth, you simply recall something that already happened. But when you lie, your brain has to juggle multiple tasks at once. It has to make up a story that sounds believable, while also keeping track of what has already been said to avoid contradictions. For example, I once had a coworker who was always late to work. Every time, he would come up with long, detailed excuses, like his car breaking down or heavy traffic, to justify his story. And he believed that the more details he added, the more convincing it would sound. But in reality, when someone lies, their brain is busy both creating the story and controlling every detail, which makes it very easy to become overloaded. When they focus too much on telling the story smoothly, they often unintentionally reveal natural reactions through their behavior. That is why we find it so hard to detect lies, because our brain tends to choose trust first. But once you learn how to observe those small signals, you will start to recognize the truth right in the middle of a conversation. Signs that someone is lying. Sign 1. Their behavior suddenly changes. Have you ever sat across from someone and suddenly noticed strange behaviors? Like they start avoiding eye contact, or unconsciously bring their hand up to cover their mouth, touch their nose, rub their eyes, or even keep scratching their neck while answering a question? There was a time when I was talking with a close friend about a project we were working on together. Normally, he was very confident. When he spoke, he would look me straight in the eye, and his body language was always relaxed. But when I asked, "Have you finished the part we agreed on last week?" his tone completely changed. He said, "I am almost done." But his actions told a very different story. He looked down at his coffee, kept fidgeting with the straw, and then unconsciously scratched his neck and touched his nose. Those small gestures made me feel like something was off, even though I could not quite explain why. It was not until later, when the project fell behind schedule, that I realized he had been lying. He had not actually done anything yet. From a psychological perspective, this is the body reacting to a state called cognitive overload. When someone lies, their brain is working at an extremely high level, trying to build a story while also monitoring your reaction. This stress activates the autonomic nervous system, causing blood to rush to tiny capillaries in areas like the nose and ears. In psychology, this is sometimes referred to as the Pinocchio effect. The sudden increase in blood flow can create a slight itching sensation, which makes the person unconsciously touch or scratch those areas without even realizing it. And what about avoiding eye contact? According to behavioral analysis reports from the FBI, this is known as blocking behavior. It is an instinctive response that develops from childhood. When the brain detects something wrong or guilt-inducing, it sends signals to shield or shut down as a form of self-protection. Their mouth might be speaking smoothly, but their nervous system is telling a completely different story. It is constantly trying to release pressure through those extra unnecessary movements. That is why, instead of only listening to what they say, you should learn to observe these glitches in their body language. That is where the cracks in their story begin to show most clearly. Sign 2. They use uncertain language. If behavior is the body's betrayal, then language is the crack in a liar's thinking. You may notice that people who are hiding the truth often tend to use evasive language patterns. Instead of making a clear statement like, "I was at home last night," they will often insert phrases that create distance, such as, "I think," "maybe," "as far as I remember," or "it seems like." These are known as minimizing language. The purpose is to reduce personal responsibility for potentially false information. If you later present evidence that contradicts them, they can easily step back by saying, "Well, I did say, I think. My memory has not been great lately." Another extremely common trait among experienced liars is repeating the question. When you ask something unexpected, like, "You took the file from my desk, right?" Instead of answering immediately, they repeat your question. "You're asking if I took the file from your desk?" This is a stalling technique used to reduce cognitive overload. In those few seconds of repetition, their brain is working at full capacity to come up with a believable version of events. Someone who is telling the truth does not need time to create a story, so they usually respond quickly and directly. A liar, on the other hand, needs space to construct their answer, and repeating the question is how they buy that time. At the same time, pay attention if they start overusing strong affirmations or swearing. Statements like, "I swear," "trust me," or "I have never lied to you" are actually a defensive mechanism. According to research in forensic linguistics, when people feel that their words are not convincing enough, they tend to rely on high commitment language to compensate for the lack of real evidence. In short, language reflects the confidence of the brain. When someone is telling the truth, their words are usually concise, decisive, and straight to the point. But when they are lying, their speech becomes indirect, filled with filler words and unnecessary reassurances. Sign 3. They try to change the subject. Have you ever asked something very serious, but the other person suddenly responded with something completely unrelated? That is when they are hitting the escape button in their mind to avoid the truth. I remember one time I asked a coworker about a mistake in a report we worked on together. I said, "Hey, why is there such a big difference in the numbers in this section?" Instead of addressing the issue directly, she suddenly looked down at my wrist and said, "Oh wow, is that a new watch? It looks really nice. Where did you get it? It suits you perfectly." Since I like tech gadgets and was just complimented, I started talking about the watch. The conversation quickly shifted to tech, shopping, and all kinds of unrelated topics. It was only near the end of the conversation that I suddenly realized my original question had never been answered. Later on, I learned that this kind of reaction is the result of a defense mechanism when the brain faces a threat. When you touch on a detail that is not true, the other person's brain goes into a kind of red alert, At that moment, the pressure of maintaining a logical lie becomes overwhelming, making them feel unsafe. To escape that anxiety, the brain automatically activates a flight response by steering the conversation in a different direction. In psychology, this behavior is also known as intentional distraction. Instead of confronting a difficult question, they throw out a different bait, usually something intriguing, a compliment, or an urgent issue, to redirect your attention. Because if you are no longer focused on the original question, their lie becomes temporarily safe. Another thing to notice is the change in tension levels. When you touch on a sensitive topic, they often appear slightly stiff or tense. But the moment the conversation shifts to something else, their body relaxes quickly and their voice becomes more comfortable. This shows that they have just escaped the pressure of explaining a difficult issue. Someone who is telling the truth usually does not need to change the subject because they do not feel threatened. But for someone who is hiding something, redirecting the conversation is often the fastest way out. So if you notice someone suddenly steering the conversation in a completely different direction, that could be the moment when their story starts to show signs of deception. Sign 4. They make mistakes when interrupted with an unexpected question about earlier details. To test whether someone is actually lying, you can ask a clever question that leads them into revealing the truth, instead of just sitting there guessing. Because a lie is usually a pre-prepared story, the person only plans the main parts in advance. When an unexpected detail appears, their story can quickly start to fall apart. For example, a friend tells you they were busy having dinner with a client at a restaurant last night, so they could not answer your call. Instead of interrogating them, you can introduce a fake but believable detail like, "Oh, that restaurant. I heard there was a power outage in the whole area last night, and they had to serve customers by candlelight, right?" In reality, there was no outage at all. But because they are focused on maintaining the logic of their lie, they are pushed into a dilemma. If they agree and say, "Yeah, it was pretty dark, a bit inconvenient," then you have basically caught them in the act. Someone telling the truth would immediately respond, "No, everything was normal, there was no power outage." This happens because of cognitive overload. When telling the truth, the brain simply retrieves stored memories. But when lying, the brain has to work twice as hard to create details, check for consistency, and remember what has already been said to avoid contradictions. When you ask questions, especially detailed or unexpected ones, you are forcing their brain to process a huge amount of information instantly, making their prepared story more likely to break down. On top of that mental pressure, liars also fall into the trap of over-monitoring their behavior. Because they are afraid of being exposed, they try to act like an honest person by tightly controlling their eye contact, gestures, and tone of voice. But this over-control often backfires, creating a stiff, unnatural appearance or slower reactions than usual. When faced with a question, they tend to repeat your question or use filler phrases to buy time, while their overloaded brain tries to come up with a response. In the end, asking questions often exposes the gaps in the story they have constructed. When they are forced to keep adding new details, they can easily contradict themselves, forgetting what they said earlier. And those inconsistencies are usually the clearest signs that they are trying to piece together a story that is not entirely true. Sign 5. The 5-second awkward pause. I clearly remember when I was working at my previous company. My team was assigned an important task to prepare premium gifts for a major client. As the deadline approached and the gifts had still not arrived, I asked the person in charge directly, "Have you placed the order and confirmed the shipping for the client's gifts yet?" At that moment, instead of giving a clear answer, there was a long pause. He froze for about 5 seconds, his eyes locked up like a computer that had suddenly stopped responding. Then he stuttered, I have already placed the order. They are on the way." That 5-second silence gave everything away. The next day, the gifts arrived late, seriously affecting the company's reputation with the client. From a psychological perspective, this delay is the result of a process called blocking and replacing in the brain. When you ask an unexpected question, a person's natural reaction is to immediately access their memory to answer. But for someone who is lying, their brain has to hit the brakes. They cannot let the truth come out naturally. So the brain has to work at full capacity to perform a complex sequence of actions, first blocking the real information, then quickly constructing a safer alternative answer. This internal struggle between erasing the old trace and building a new script creates what is known as cognitive delay. At that moment, the brain is like a computer overloaded with data, leading to a brief freeze for a few seconds. In short, this slowdown compared to normal conversation rhythm is one of the clearest signs that they are not recalling something that actually happened. Instead, they are busy manufacturing a version of reality that does not truly exist. So, as you can see, lies rarely reach perfection. When someone tries to twist the truth, they will almost always leave behind small traces in their behavior, their choice of words, or even the rhythm of their responses. As long as you stay aware enough to notice those details and know how to ask the right questions at the right time, you will find that the truth often reveals itself before they even finish telling their story. The truth can be hidden, but human instinct cannot lie. And if you have any questions, or if you have encountered real-life situations that are difficult to understand, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We can explore the answers together and dive deeper into them in future videos. Goodbye, and see you next time.